My husband's lover called and said, "He's mine now, you'll get nothing." She was wrong. The phone rang at 2 in the morning. Not the gentle buzz of a text or the polite chime of a daytime call, but that old-fashioned, ear-splitting ring that makes your heart drop before you even pick up. I fumbled for it in the dark, knocking over the water glass on my nightstand, and pressed it to my ear with shaking hands. "Hello?" Silence. Then a woman's voice, smooth as honey and twice as poisonous. "Kathy, this is Nicole. I think it's time we talked." My chest went tight. I knew that name. I'd seen it on his phone once, twice, maybe a dozen times. Always explained away as a colleague, a work contact. Nothing to worry about. But at 2 in the morning, nothing is ever nothing. "Who? Don't play stupid." She cut me off, her voice dripping with the kind of confidence that comes from thinking you've already won. "James and I have been together for over a year, and before you start crying or screaming or whatever pathetic thing you're about to do, let me save you the trouble." I could hear her take a breath, savoring the moment. In the background, I heard music playing, soft jazz, the kind James always said he hated when I suggested it for dinner parties, the kind he apparently loved when he was with her. "He's mine now," she continued, her voice almost sing-song, "completely mine. And honestly, Kathy, it's time you accepted reality. You'll get nothing. Not the house, not the money, nothing. He's already taken care of that. The paperwork is done, the accounts are moved, everything is in motion. By this time next month, you'll be out of that house and out of his life." She paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "He wanted me to wait to tell you, but I couldn't resist. I wanted you to know that while you were sleeping in your separate bedroom, thinking you still had a marriage, he was with me, planning our future, planning your exit." "You don't know what you're talking about," I managed to whisper, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "Oh, but I do. I know everything, Kathy. I know about the mortgage he took out on your precious house. I know about the joint accounts he's been draining for months. I know he's been meeting with lawyers, setting up trusts, moving assets. You signed so many papers without even reading them, didn't you? So trusting, so naive." My stomach turned over. The refinance papers, the documents I'd signed 6 weeks ago. That wasn't a refinance, sweetheart. That was him securing a loan against the house, a loan he has no intention of paying back. When it defaults, and it will default, you'll lose everything. And guess what? Your name is on those papers, your signature, your liability. "That's fraud," I said, finding a thread of strength somewhere in my chest. "He can't just—" "Can't he? He already has. And who's going to believe you? A housewife who hasn't worked in over 20 years, who doesn't even know how much money is in her own bank account. He's a respected financial consultant. I'm a partner at a law firm. Well, you're nothing, Kathy. Just a woman who was too comfortable to pay attention." The law firm. She was a lawyer. Of course she was. That's how he'd done it. That's how he'd known exactly how to trap me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because I want you to know that you lost. Not tomorrow, not next month, but right now. This conversation is your loss. I wanted to hear it in your voice, that moment when you realize you're completely powerless. And honestly..." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "It's even better than I imagined." The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, the phone still pressed against my ear, listening to the dial tone like it might tell me this was all a nightmare. But the wet spot on the sheets from the spilled water was real. The metallic taste in my mouth was real. The way my hands wouldn't stop shaking was real. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the water on the sheets to turn cold against my skin. Long enough for the sky outside my window to shift from black to that deep navy blue that comes just before dawn. Long enough for the dial tone to turn into that horrible, off-the-hook beeping that sounds like a heart monitor flatlining. When I finally moved, Setting the phone down on the nightstand with trembling hands, I realized something. I wasn't crying. I thought I would be. I thought I'd collapse, break down, become exactly the pathetic thing Nicole expected me to be. But instead, I felt something else entirely. Something cold and clear and sharp as ice. I felt awake for the first time in years. 3 months earlier, I would have told you my life was ordinary. Not perfect, mind you, but stable, comfortable. James and I had been married for 23 years. We lived in a modest 2-story in Phoenix, the kind of place with a small yard and a porch swing that creaked when the wind blew. I'd given up my career as a paralegal when we got married because he wanted someone at home, someone to take care of things. I told myself it was a partnership, a division of labor that made sense. Looking back now, I can see how the cracks were always there. I just chose not to look. James was a financial consultant, the kind of guy who wore tailored suits and talked about market trends over dinner. He handled all our money, every penny. I signed where he told me to sign, trusted what he told me to trust. When I asked questions, he'd pat my hand and say things like, "Don't worry your pretty head about it, Kath. This is what I do for a living." I remember the first time he said that to me. We'd been married about 3 years, and I'd asked about our retirement account. Just a simple question about whether we were contributing enough, whether we were on track. He'd looked up from his newspaper, smiled that patient smile, and delivered that line like it was perfectly reasonable. I'd laughed it off then, thought it was sweet even, that he wanted to shoulder the burden of financial planning. I was busy with the house, with my volunteer work at the library, with maintaining the life we'd built. Division of labor, I told myself. That's what successful marriages do. But over the years, that simple division calcified into something else entirely. He didn't just handle the finances. He controlled them, controlled me through them, and I didn't even notice it happening. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. The first real crack appeared about 6 months before that phone call. We were at dinner, one of those chain restaurants with too loud music and waiters who pretend to care. It was supposed to be a celebration, our anniversary, though James had picked the place without asking me. He always picked the places. I'd ordered the salmon, remembering too late that I'd told him just that morning how I was tired of fish, how I wanted to try something different. But he'd ordered it for me before I could speak up, the way he always did. "You love salmon," he'd said with that confident smile. And I'd nodded, because it was easier than correcting him. I reached for the bill out of habit, just to see, just to have that small moment of participation in our life together, and he snatched it away so fast it tore. "I've got it," he snapped. The force of it surprised me. His face had gone red, his jaw tight. Around us, other diners kept eating, kept talking, kept living their normal lives while mine suddenly felt tilted on its axis. "I know, I just wanted to—" I said, "I've got it." His voice was low, controlled, but there was something underneath it I'd never heard before. Or maybe I had, and I'd just gotten very good at pretending I hadn't. The waitress pretended not to notice. I pretended his reaction was normal. That's what you do when you've been with someone for over 2 decades. You smooth over the rough edges, tell yourself everyone has bad days, convince yourself that the tightness in your chest is just indigestion. We drove home in silence. The kind of silence that fills the car like water, rising slowly until you feel like you're drowning in it. I kept my hands folded in my lap, watching the streetlights blur past, and wondered when I'd become the kind of woman who was afraid to reach for a dinner check. But that night, after he fell asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why was he so defensive? What was on that bill that I wasn't supposed to see? I told myself I was being paranoid, that years of watching crime shows had rotted my brain. But the question lingered like smoke in a closed room. I lay there in the dark, listening to him snore, and tried to remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. Not the surface pleasantries about the weather or what to have for dinner, but an actual conversation about our lives, our dreams, our fears. I couldn't remember. The realization made my chest ache. When had we stopped talking? When had we become two strangers sharing a house? I got up around 3 that morning, unable to sleep, and made myself tea in the kitchen. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, each second marking time in a life that suddenly felt very small. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, and felt utterly alone. The second crack came a month later. I was cleaning out the hall closet, one of those mindless tasks you do when you're trying to feel productive, and I found a credit card statement wedged behind a box of old tax returns. It wasn't even hidden, really, just misplaced. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to. The Vault, a steakhouse downtown that I'd wanted to try for years, but James always said was too expensive. Le Bernardin, an upscale French place I'd never even heard of. The Greenhouse, a romantic garden restaurant I'd suggested once for our anniversary, and he'd dismissed as too pretentious. Hotels in cities we'd never visited together. The Ritz-Carlton in San Diego, the Four Seasons in Santa Barbara, a boutique hotel in Sedona called the Rose Garden Inn, 3 separate visits over 2 months, a jewelry store purchase for $8,000 on our anniversary, when he'd given me a card and a grocery store bouquet. I remember staring at that line item, my hands starting to shake. $8,000 on our anniversary. The same day he'd come home with wilted carnations and a Hallmark card with a generic message he hadn't even bothered to personalize. I sat down on the closet floor, surrounded by old coats and forgotten boxes, and tried to make the numbers make sense. Tried to find an explanation that wasn't the obvious one. But there wasn't one. There was only the truth, staring me in the face from a piece of paper that smelled faintly of his cologne. I confronted him that night, walked right into his home office with the statement in my hand and said, "What is this?" He didn't even look up from his computer. "What's what?" His voice was casual, distracted. He was typing something, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. I could see the reflection of his screen in his reading glasses. Numbers, spreadsheets. The language of his life that I'd never been allowed to understand. This. I slapped the paper on his desk, harder than I intended. These charges. Where were you? Who were you with? He stopped typing, looked at the statement, then looked at me, and smiled. Not a warm smile, not even an apologetic smile. The kind of smile you give a child who's just said something adorably stupid. "Kath, those are business expenses, client dinners, hotel stays for conferences. You know how it works." "I don't know how it works. You've never told me how it works." "Because it's complicated." He sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing his eyes like I was exhausting him. "This is my job, Kathy. This is how I keep a roof over our heads. Or would you prefer I start asking your permission every time I need to take a client to dinner?" $8,000 at a jewelry store is a business expense. It was a gift for a client's wife. High-stakes players expect that kind of thing. If you'd ever worked in the real world, you'd understand. That last part stung more than the rest. I'd worked. I'd given up my career for him, for us, and now he was using it as a weapon. I wanted to scream, to throw the statement in his face, to demand the truth. But instead, I picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and walked out of the room. Because that's what I'd been trained to do. Stay quiet. Don't make waves. Don't be difficult. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, to the bathroom, and locked the door behind me. Only then did I let myself react. I ran the water in the sink so he wouldn't hear me cry. Sat on the edge of the bathtub and let the tears come, silent and hot and full of a grief I didn't yet understand. I was mourning my marriage. I just didn't know it yet. You're probably screaming at your screen right now, telling me to leave him. But love isn't blind. It's paralyzed. It's 1,000 tiny compromises that stack up until you can't remember who you were before them. That night, I lay in bed and told myself the lie I'd been telling for years. You're too old to start over, Kathy. What would you even do? Where would you go? You gave up everything for this marriage. You can't just throw it away because of a credit card statement. You're 52 years old. No recent work experience. No retirement savings in your own name. No career to fall back on. Who's going to hire you? Who's going to want you? The thing is, I wasn't just talking myself out of leaving. I was talking myself into staying invisible, into being smaller, quieter, less of a problem. I thought if I just didn't ask questions, didn't rock the boat, maybe things would go back to normal. Maybe I'd stop feeling like I was drowning in my own home. So I tried. God help me, I tried. I started making myself useful in ways I never had before. I cooked his favorite meals, studied recipes online for hours to get them perfect. Beef Wellington, which took me 4 tries to master. Coq au vin, which I'd never even tasted before but made because he mentioned it once, casually, as something a client's wife had served. I ironed his shirts even though we had a dry cleaner, pressing each collar and cuff with meticulous care. I organized his office, his closet, his life, trying to make myself indispensable. I tiptoed around his moods like they were landmines, learned to read his face when he came through the door, gauge whether it was a good day or a bad day, adjust my entire demeanor accordingly. On bad days, I stayed quiet, served dinner without conversation, disappeared into other rooms. On good days, I tried to be cheerful, engaging, the wife he'd married instead of the ghost I'd become. I sacrificed my voice, my opinions, my right to ask questions, all because I believed the lie that I was too old, too dependent, too powerless to do anything else. And the worst part? He didn't even notice. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. The house we lived in, the one with the porch swing and the small yard, had been my dream. I'd picked out the paint colors, spent weeks choosing the perfect shade of sage green for the living room, soft gray for the bedroom. I'd planted the roses by the front walk, drove to 3 different nurseries to find the exact variety I wanted. Roses that bloomed twice a year in shades of coral and cream. I spent weekends refinishing the kitchen cabinets by hand, stripping decades of paint in the Arizona heat, sanding until my shoulders ached, applying coat after coat of stain until they glowed with a warmth that made the whole room feel alive. It was the one thing in my life that felt like mine. But it wasn't. Not really. James had put it in his name when we bought it, said it was easier that way for tax purposes. I didn't question it. Why would I? We were married. What was his was mine, and what was mine was his. That's what I believed. That's what I was supposed to believe. About 2 months before the phone call, he came home with papers for me to sign. It was a Thursday, I remember, because I'd made meatloaf, his favorite, and he barely touched it. Just pushed it around his plate while scrolling through his phone, responding to messages with half smiles I wasn't invited to understand. After dinner, he spread the documents across the kitchen table, pushing aside my plate without asking if I was finished. I need you to sign these, he said, not looking at me. It's a refinance, interest rates dropped, and I want to lock in a lower payment, free up some cash. I looked at the papers. There were so many of them, dense paragraphs of legal text that made my eyes glaze over. Terms like subordinate lien and deed of trust and joint and several liability. This seems like a lot of paperwork for a refinance, I said carefully. He sighed, that particular sigh that meant I was being difficult. It's standard, Kathy. This is what these things look like. Do you want me to pay a lawyer $1,000 to explain what I already know? I just want to understand what I'm signing. You're signing a refinance. That's what you're signing. He slid a pen across the table. Look, I've got a call with a client in 10 minutes. Can you just trust me on this? Have I ever steered us wrong financially? And there it was. The question designed to make me feel guilty for asking questions. The implication that doubt was betrayal, that questions were accusations. "You're sure this is just a refinance?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "Positive. Don't you trust me?" I signed the papers and handed them back. Watched him gather them quickly, slide them into his briefcase, snap it shut like he was sealing away evidence. He kissed the top of my head on his way out of the room. "Thanks, babe. You're the best." I sat there at the kitchen table for a long time after he left, staring at the spot where the documents had been. My meatloaf was getting cold. Outside, I could hear our neighbor's dog barking, a sound that usually annoyed me, but suddenly felt like the only real thing in the world. Something was wrong. I knew it in my bones. But I didn't know what to do with that knowledge, so I did what I'd been doing for years. I pushed it down, cleaned up the dinner dishes, and pretended everything was fine. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known because I'd never been allowed to know, was that he wasn't refinancing. He was taking out a second mortgage, using the house as collateral for a loan he had no intention of paying back. A loan to fund his new life with Nicole. By the time I found out, the damage was done. The house I'd poured my heart into, the one sanctuary where I felt at peace, was on the brink of foreclosure. And I didn't even know it. I later learned that 19% of men and 14% of women with cognitive problems experience self-neglect. I wasn't cognitively impaired, but I was emotionally battered to the point where I'd stopped taking care of myself, stopped asking questions, stopped fighting. I'd neglected my own well-being because I thought my only value was in being useful to him. Looking back, I can see how deliberate it all was. Every time I asked a question, he made me feel stupid. Every time I expressed concern, he told me I was overreacting. Every time I tried to assert myself, he reminded me how dependent I was, how little I knew about the real world. It's called gaslighting, though I didn't know that word at the time. I just knew that I felt crazy. That I second-guessed every thought, every instinct, every ounce of intuition that told me something was wrong. The breaking point came about 2 weeks after I signed those papers. I was looking for an old photo to send to my sister, digging through boxes in the garage when I found our wedding album. It was buried under years of accumulated stuff, old Christmas decorations and broken appliances we'd meant to fix and never had. I pulled it out, blew off the dust, and sat down on the concrete floor. The garage smelled like motor oil and old cardboard, the Arizona heat making everything feel close and suffocating. I flipped it open and stared at the woman in the white dress. She was smiling. Not the polite, tight-lipped smile I gave now, but a real smile, the kind that reaches your eyes and lights up your whole face. She looked confident, hopeful, alive. Her eyes were bright, her shoulders back, her whole body language screaming possibility. I didn't recognize her. I looked at James in the photos, young and handsome and promising forever, his arm around my waist, pulling me close, looking at me like I was the only person in the world. When had he stopped looking at me like that? When had I stopped being worth looking at? There was a photo of us cutting the cake, laughing as frosting got on his tuxedo. Another of us dancing, my head on his shoulder, his hands spread across my back. We looked happy. We looked in love. Had it been real? Or had I been fooling myself even then? And then I thought about the man who'd snapped at me over a restaurant bill, who'd dismissed my questions, who'd made me feel like a burden in my own home. When did I stop being that woman in the white dress? When did I become this shadow? I sat there on that garage floor, the album open in my lap, and cried. Not delicate tears, but ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for the years I'd wasted, for the woman I used to be, for the marriage I thought I had but never did. Research shows that in 55% of abuse cases, there's also emotional abuse involved. I sat there on that garage floor and realized that's what this was. Not just financial betrayal, but emotional abuse. Years of it, layered so subtly I hadn't even noticed I was suffocating. I closed the album, put it back in the box, and walked into the house. My eyes were red, my face blotchy, but James was in his office with the door closed, taking a call. He wouldn't notice. He never noticed. That's when I saw the bank statement. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, just lying there like a ticking bomb. James must have brought in the mail and forgotten to hide it. I picked it up. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. There were transfers, dozens of them, thousands of dollars moving out of our joint account into one I didn't recognize. Payments to credit cards I'd never heard of. A wire transfer to a law firm with the notation retainer. Most shocking was a single line near the bottom, a transfer of $15,000 with the memo N. Henderson, apartment deposit and first month. N. Henderson, Nicole Henderson. He'd paid for her apartment, with our money I'd helped earn through years of managing the house, supporting his career, being the perfect corporate wife at company dinners and networking events. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at that statement until the numbers blurred. And then, for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something other than resignation. I felt rage. The thing about rage is that it clears the fog. Suddenly, I could see everything. The lies, the manipulation, the calculated cruelty of a man who'd spent over 2 decades convincing me I was nothing without him. And I could see something else, too. The woman in the wedding photo, the one with the bright eyes and confident smile. She was still in there somewhere, buried under years of gaslighting and control, but still there, still fighting. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't scream or cry or beg for an explanation. I just folded the statement, put it in my purse, and went to bed. When he came home, I pretended everything was fine. Smiled when he kissed my forehead, asked about his day, served him the dinner I'd cooked. But inside, I was planning. You see, I might have given up my career, but I'd spent years as a paralegal. I knew how to build a case, I knew how to gather evidence, and I knew how to stay calm under pressure. The next morning, after James left for work, I went through every drawer, every file, every folder in his office. I took pictures of bank statements, loan documents, credit card bills. My hands moved with a steadiness that surprised me, clicking photo after photo on my phone. I found emails between him and Nicole, messages so explicit and cruel I had to stop reading to keep from throwing up. One particularly stood out, from 3 months earlier. "She signed the papers today," James had written. "Didn't even read them. God, she's so trusting it's almost sad. By the time she figures out what's happening, everything will be locked down. The house will default, her name is on all the liability, and I'll be clear, we'll be clear, starting fresh, just like we planned." Nicole's response made my blood run cold. I almost feel bad for her, almost. But honestly, she had to know this was coming. You don't let yourself get this dependent on someone and expect it to work out. She made her choices. I took a screenshot of that exchange, and then I kept looking. I found proof that he'd been planning this for over a year, systematically draining our accounts and hiding assets. I found a document outlining his strategy, literally titled Exit Plan, detailing how he'd transfer everything of value out of his name before filing for divorce. I found messages where he and Nicole laughed about me, called me the wife, like I didn't have a name, made jokes about how easy I was to manipulate. And I saved it all, every email, every photo, every receipt. I created a digital folder so organized it would have made my old boss proud, categorized by date, by type, by relevance. Bank documents in one subfolder, personal correspondence in another, property records in a third. I became my own ally because I had to. There was no one else. My family lived across the country, and we'd grown distant over the years because James always had a reason we couldn't visit. My mom's birthday? Too busy with work. Christmas? Too expensive to fly. My sister's wedding? He had a conference that weekend that he absolutely couldn't miss. I'd believed him every time. Or maybe I just hadn't had the energy to fight. My friends had drifted away because I'd stopped calling, stopped making plans, stopped being anyone other than James's wife. Every time someone invited me to lunch or a movie, I'd check with James first. Is it okay if I go? Do you need me here? And his response was always the same slight hesitation, that little sigh, that sense that I was inconveniencing him by having a life outside our marriage. Eventually, I just stopped asking, stopped accepting invitations, stopped reaching out. So it was just me and a manila folder full of evidence that my husband was a liar and a thief. For 3 weeks, I played the role of the obedient wife. I smiled, I cooked, I pretended I didn't know. And every day, I gathered more proof. Bank records showing systematic transfers, property documents proving he'd moved the deed to our vacation timeshare into Nicole's name, proof that he'd forged my signature on loan applications, proof that he'd transferred ownership of assets into Nicole's name. I found out he'd opened credit cards in my name, run up balances, and let them default. My credit score, which I hadn't checked in years, was destroyed. He'd ruined my financial future while building his new one. It was exhausting, living a double life, pretending everything was fine while my insides twisted with betrayal and anger. Every morning, I'd wake up next to him, watch him sleep, and fight the urge to scream the truth in his face. But I did it, because I knew that if I confronted him too soon, he'd find a way to hide the evidence, to gaslight me into doubting what I'd seen. I had to be smart, smarter than him. I started documenting everything in a journal too, not just the financial evidence, but the patterns of emotional abuse, the times he made me feel stupid, the times he dismissed my feelings, the times he made me question my own sanity. Writing it down made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Page after page of small cruelties, of controlling behaviors, of systematic isolation. The pattern was undeniable. Then came that phone call from Nicole, the one at 2 a.m, dripping with smug satisfaction. And suddenly, I realized something. She didn't know I knew. James hadn't told her that I'd found the bank statement, that I'd been gathering evidence for weeks. She thought she was delivering devastating news to a clueless, broken woman. She was wrong. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd have the guts to do. I hired a lawyer, used money from an old savings account James didn't know about, one I'd opened years ago with a small inheritance from my grandmother. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a consultation. My grandmother had given me $5,000 when I turned 30, money from the sale of her house. "Put this somewhere safe," she'd told me, "somewhere just for you. You never know when you might need it." At the time, I'd thought it was paranoid. Now I understood she'd been wise. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Valdez, listened to my story and looked at my evidence. Her office was small, just a desk and 2 chairs and walls lined with law books, but she radiated competence. She was maybe 60, with silver hair cut in a practical bob and reading glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. She spent 2 hours going through everything I'd brought. Didn't say much, just made notes in a legal pad, her handwriting small and precise. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious. "Kathy, you have a case, a strong one. But you need to understand something. This isn't just about money. This is about reclaiming your life." I cried in her office that day. Not sad tears, but tears of relief. Someone believed me. Someone saw what I'd seen and didn't tell me I was overreacting. "I'm not going to lie to you," Patricia continued, sliding her reading glasses back on to review her notes. "This is going to be hard. He's going to fight dirty. From what you've shown me, he's been planning this for a long time, and he has resources. But you have something more important. You have the truth, and you have evidence." She tapped the folder of documents I'd brought. "This is good work, really good work. You've documented everything I would have told you to look for. It's clear you know what you're doing." "I used to be a paralegal," I said, my voice still shaky from crying. "I can tell. That training is going to serve you well here." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "But I need to know right now if you're ready for this. Because once we start, there's no going back. He's going to know you're not the woman he thought you were. He's going to be angry. He might get worse before this is over." I thought about that for a moment. Thought about the woman in the wedding photo, the one who'd been confident and hopeful. Thought about the woman I'd become, small and silent and scared. "I'm ready," I said. And I meant it. Patricia helped me freeze our joint accounts, file for legal separation, and start the process of protecting what little was left of our assets. It wasn't easy. James fought me every step of the way, hired an expensive lawyer, tried to paint me as unstable and vindictive. But I had the evidence. And evidence doesn't lie. His lawyer, Marcus Chen, was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive suit, practiced smile, the kind of smooth confidence that comes from winning cases through intimidation rather than truth. Our first meeting with both lawyers present, he'd looked at me like I was a particularly boring bug. "Mrs. Morrison," he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I think if we're all reasonable here, we can resolve this quickly. My client is willing to offer you a fair settlement. The house is in foreclosure, as you know, so that's not really an asset anymore. But he's willing to give you $20,000 and cover your rent for 6 months while you get on your feet." $20,000 for 23 years of marriage, for giving up my career, for the house I'd refinished with my own hands. Patricia had put her hand on my arm, a warning to stay calm. "That's not going to work for us, Mr. Chen. My client is entitled to half of all marital assets, and we have documentation showing your client has been systematically hiding and transferring those assets for over a year. Documentation that is largely based on my client's private communications obtained without his knowledge or consent," Chen had countered smoothly. "Obtained from email accounts and physical documents in the marital home to which my client had every legal right to access," Patricia shot back. The fight went on for months. Depositions, document requests, negotiations that went nowhere. James denied everything, claimed the transfers were business investments, said the messages with Nicole were taken out of context. But slowly, Patricia built the case. Brought in a forensic accountant who traced every dollar. Subpoenaed bank records that James couldn't explain away. Found witnesses, including a colleague of James's who testified that he'd bragged about hiding assets from his soon-to-be ex-wife. Through it all, I kept working at my part-time job at the legal aid clinic, kept gathering evidence, kept showing up. There were days I wanted to give up, days when the legal bills and the stress and the constant fighting felt like too much. One particularly brutal day stands out. It was the day of my deposition, when James's lawyer grilled me for 6 hours straight about every financial decision I'd made in 23 years of marriage. Why hadn't I kept better records? Why hadn't I asked more questions? Why had I trusted my husband? I sat in that conference room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and answered every question as honestly as I could. Yes, I had trusted him. Yes, I had signed papers without reading them thoroughly. Yes, I had believed him when he said he was taking care of our finances. "And that was foolish, wasn't it, Mrs. Morrison?" Chen had asked, his voice dripping with judgment. Patricia had objected, but the damage was done. I felt foolish. I felt stupid. I felt like everything James had ever said about me was true. But then I looked at Patricia, at her steady, calm presence across the table, and I remembered something she'd told me in our first meeting. "The system will try to make you feel like this is your fault. It's not. Remember that." So I sat up straighter, looked Chen directly in the eye, and said, "No, it wasn't foolish to trust my husband. It was human. What was foolish was him thinking he could get away with betraying that trust." The room went silent. Chen moved on to his next question, but I saw something shift in his expression. Respect, maybe. or at least recognition that I wasn't going to be as easy to break as he'd thought. After the deposition, Patricia took me to a coffee shop down the street. We sat in a corner booth, and she bought me the most expensive coffee drink on the menu, one with caramel and whipped cream and all the things I never let myself have because James thought they were frivolous. "You did good in there," she said, stirring her black coffee. "Really good." "I don't feel good. I feel exhausted." "That's normal. Depositions are designed to exhaust you, to make you make mistakes. But you didn't. You stayed calm. You told the truth. And you stood your ground." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into my fingers. "Do you think we'll win?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I think we'll get you what you deserve. It might not be everything, and it might not feel like winning. But it'll be enough to start over. And sometimes, that's all we can ask for." She was right, of course. But in that moment, sitting in that coffee shop, I realized something important. I'd already won. Not in the legal sense, not in terms of money or property or revenge. But I'd won my voice back. I'd won the ability to look someone in the eye and say, "No, that's not true," without immediately second-guessing myself. That was worth more than any settlement. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and phone calls and small victories. A judge ruled that James had to provide full financial disclosure, something he'd been avoiding. We found another hidden account, this one with $40,000 he'd claimed didn't exist. Patricia filed a motion for sanctions, and for the first time, James looked worried in court. But the biggest change was in me. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in trauma and abuse. I used what little money I had left from my grandmother's account to pay for sessions, telling myself it was an investment in my future. In our first session, Dr. Chen asked me to describe myself in 5 words. I sat there, staring at her calm face, and realized I couldn't do it. I didn't know who I was anymore. I'd spent so long being James's wife that I'd forgotten how to be Kathy. "That's okay," Dr. Chen said gently. "That's what we're here to figure out. You're not broken, Kathy. You're just rediscovering yourself." Over the months, therapy became my lifeline. I learned about trauma bonding, about how abuse rewires your brain, about why it's so hard to leave even when you know you should. I learned that my inability to ask questions wasn't weakness, it was a survival mechanism. I learned that I wasn't crazy or stupid or any of the things James had made me feel. I was just human, and humans can heal. Dr. Chen introduced me to a concept called post-traumatic growth, the idea that trauma can actually make you stronger if you process it properly. At first, I thought it was nonsense, toxic positivity dressed up in therapeutic language. But slowly, I started to see it. Started to see how the pain was carving out space for something new: strength, independence, self-knowledge. I started keeping a journal, not just of evidence, but of my thoughts and feelings. Pages and pages of raw, honest reflection. Some entries were angry, filled with rage at James and Nicole and the unfairness of it all. Others were sad, mourning the life I'd thought I had. But some, increasingly, were hopeful. Notes about small victories, observations about who I was becoming. One entry, written 3 weeks before the restaurant confrontation, simply said, "I looked in the mirror today and recognized myself. But I didn't, because I'd made a promise to myself and to that woman in the wedding photo. I was going to get my life back. I knew confronting him would have to be public. Not because I wanted revenge exactly, but because I needed witnesses. I needed people to hear the truth from my lips, to see the proof I'd gathered, to know that I wasn't crazy or vindictive or any of the things he'd tried to make me believe. So I waited. I waited until he planned a celebration dinner with Nicole, a fancy event at one of Phoenix's upscale restaurants to celebrate his new promotion. He'd invited colleagues, friends, people who thought he was a good guy. I found out about it from a colleague's wife I'd run into at the grocery store. She'd mentioned it casually, assuming I knew. You must be so excited about James's promotion. Are you looking forward to the celebration dinner? I'd smiled, pretended I knew all about it, got the details, the restaurant, the date, the time. He hadn't even invited me to his own celebration dinner. I showed up uninvited. I spent hours getting ready that night, not to look beautiful for him, but to look strong for myself. I wore a navy blue dress I'd bought with my own money, simple and elegant. Did my makeup carefully, covering the dark circles under my eyes from months of stress and sleepless nights. Styled my hair the way I used to wear it before I'd let myself go, before I'd stopped caring about anything but being invisible. I looked at myself in the mirror of my new apartment, the small one-bedroom I'd moved into a week earlier after serving James with separation papers. The woman looking back at me was somewhere between the confident bride and the broken wife. She was scarred, tired, but standing. She was enough. The restaurant was called Celestial, one of those trendy places with dim lighting and prices that make your eyes water. I'd never been, though I'd mentioned wanting to try it years ago. James had said it was pretentious. Apparently, it was pretentious enough for Nicole. The look on his face when he saw me walk through those doors was almost worth all the pain. Almost. His expression went from shock to anger to fear in the space of a heartbeat. He was sitting at the head of a long table, Nicole beside him in a red dress that probably cost more than my rent. Around them, a dozen people in business attire, colleagues and friends, all laughing and drinking and celebrating. The conversation died as I walked closer. You could have heard a pin drop. "James," I said, my voice steady, "I think it's time we told everyone the truth." He stood up, tried to take my arm, his smile forced. "Kathy, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." I pulled my arm away and turned to the table. "My husband has been embezzling from our joint accounts for over a year. He's forged my signature on loan documents, used our home as collateral for debts I knew nothing about, and transferred assets into her name." I pointed at Nicole, who'd gone pale, "and I have proof of all of it." I pulled out my phone, projected images onto the wall behind me using the restaurant's display screen, the same technology they used to show the wine list and specials, bank statements, emails, text messages, screenshots of everything. The table was silent. I showed them the email where James called me so trusting it's almost sad. Showed them the messages where he and Nicole laughed about manipulating me. Showed them the financial records proving systematic theft. "You can't do this," James hissed. "You're humiliating me." "No," I said. "You humiliated yourself." I clicked to another image, the fake refinance documents, the forged signatures, the proof that he'd destroyed my credit score while building a new life. "Everything he told you about me is a lie. He didn't leave because I was difficult or crazy or any of the things he's probably said. He left because he's a thief and a liar, and he found someone who didn't care." I looked at Nicole. She was staring at the screen, her face ashen. Looking at evidence she'd probably never seen before. The other women, the other accounts, the debts James had hidden even from her. "You think you won," I said to her directly. "You think you got the prize, but you didn't win anything. You just inherited my problem. Good luck with that." The silence that followed was deafening. People stared. Some whispered. One of James's colleagues stood up and left without a word. Nicole grabbed her purse and followed, practically running for the door. James stood there, his face red, his hands shaking. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I regret staying silent for so long." I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of conversation starting up again, shock and disbelief and scandal rippling through the room. My phone buzzed in my purse. "Patricia, texting to make sure I was okay. I'd told her what I planned to do, and she'd advised against it, said it could hurt the case. But some things are more important than strategy. Sometimes, you need to speak your truth out loud. Consequences be damned. I walked to my car in the parking garage, my heels clicking on the concrete, and let myself feel everything. The fear, the satisfaction, the grief, the relief, all of it at once, overwhelming and cleansing. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, and then I drove to my new apartment, my small sanctuary, and finally let myself breathe. But here's the part that might surprise you. James didn't face any real legal consequences. Oh, Patricia tried. We filed reports, presented evidence, did everything by the book. But he had a good lawyer, better connections, and a knack for making himself look like the victim. The forged signatures? He claimed I'd given him verbal permission and just forgotten. The hidden assets, business investments that didn't work out, the messages with Nicole, private communications between adults, nothing illegal about them. The legal system, I learned, is very good at punishing poor people for minor crimes and very bad at punishing rich people for major ones. He kept his job, kept most of the assets he'd hidden. The house did go into foreclosure, just like he'd planned. And because my name was on the loan, my credit was destroyed. He'd covered his tracks well enough that proving fraud was nearly impossible. He married Nicole 6 months after our divorce was finalized. I saw the announcement on social media, a tasteful photo of them at City Hall, both smiling like they'd won something. And you know what? I was okay with that. Do you think that was fair? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Because here's the thing I learned. Justice isn't always about someone getting punished. Sometimes it's about you getting free. I didn't get the house, didn't get half of what I should have legally been entitled to. Patricia fought hard, but in the end, James's lawyers were better at hiding assets than we were at finding them. The final settlement was a joke, barely enough to cover my legal fees and 6 months of rent. But I got something more valuable. I got my voice back, my dignity, my sense of self. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I moved into a small apartment in downtown Phoenix. It wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom with a balcony that overlooked the city. But it was mine, completely, utterly mine. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building that had been recently renovated. The walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbors' lives through them, but I didn't mind. It felt alive, real, so different from the sterile silence of the house I'd lost. I furnished it slowly, piece by piece, from thrift stores and estate sales. A small couch in soft gray fabric. A kitchen table that wobbled until I fixed it. Bookshelves I assembled myself, following instructions and only cursing a little when the pieces didn't fit right at first. Each item I chose felt like a small act of rebellion. This couch, because I liked it, not because it matched some imaginary decorator's vision. This rug, because the colors made me happy, not because it was practical. I hung curtains in the bedroom, light blue ones that filtered the morning sun into something soft and hopeful. Put plants on the balcony, herbs I could use for cooking. Made the space mine in ways the house had never been. I started managing what little money I had left with a fierceness I didn't know I possessed. Opened a new bank account, started a budget, learned about investments and retirement planning. Things I should have been doing all along but had outsourced to James because I believed I wasn't capable. I bought books about personal finance, watched YouTube videos about building credit after financial abuse, attended free workshops at the library about money management for women. Turns out, I was more than capable. My credit score was destroyed, but I learned I could rebuild it. Slowly. Got a secured credit card, used it for small purchases, paid it off in full every month. Checked my credit report religiously, disputed the fraudulent accounts James had opened in my name. It was tedious, frustrating work. But every point my score climbed felt like a victory. I got a part-time job at a legal aid clinic, helping other women navigate divorces and financial abuse cases. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay much, but it felt like breathing fresh air after years of suffocating. My supervisor, a woman named Rosa, who'd been practicing family law for 30 years, took me under her wing, taught me the updated legal procedures, the new technologies, the strategies that worked, and the ones that didn't. "You're good at this," she told me one day, after I'd helped a client document her husband's hidden income. "You should think about going back to school, getting your paralegal certification updated." The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I was 52 years old. Was it too late to rebuild a career? But then I remembered the lie I'd told myself for so long. You're too old, too dependent, too powerless. I'd believed that lie once. I wasn't going to believe it again. Every morning, I woke up in that little apartment, made myself coffee, and sat on the balcony watching the sunrise. And I felt something I hadn't felt in over 2 decades. Peace. Not the absence of problems, because God knows I still had plenty of those. The bills were tight. The legal aid clinic only gave me 20 hours a week. I had to get food from the food bank sometimes, swallow my pride and accept help. But it was the peace that comes from knowing you're not lying to yourself anymore. That you're not shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. I started rebuilding my financial security one small step at a time. Paid off the debts I'd inherited from the divorce, $500 here, $200 there. Built up an emergency fund, just $200 at first, then $500, then $1,000. Each milestone felt enormous. $1,000 in savings, money that was mine, that no one could take from me. It was more security than I'd had in years. I started contributing to a retirement account again. Just $25 a month at first, all I could afford. But it was something. It was mine. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy. But it was mine. I also started talking to other women who'd been through similar situations. Joined a support group for survivors of financial abuse. Met every Tuesday evening in the basement of a community center. Shared my story, listened to theirs, and I realized something important. We weren't weak. We weren't stupid. We were human beings who'd loved people who didn't deserve it. The group was small, usually 6 to 8 women, all ages, all backgrounds. There was Maria, whose husband had taken out loans in her name and disappeared. Jennifer, whose partner had controlled every penny for 15 years. Deborah, who'd discovered her husband had a second family he'd been supporting with their retirement savings. Maria was 28, a full 24 years younger than me. But her story could have been mine. She'd married young, trusted completely, woke up one day to find her credit destroyed and her husband gone. She worked 2 jobs now, trying to dig herself out of debt she hadn't created. "The worst part isn't the money," she told the group one evening, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "It's feeling like I should have known. Like everyone's looking at me thinking, how could you be so stupid?" I knew that feeling. We all did. The heads nodding around the circle confirmed it. Jennifer was in her 60s, elegant and well-spoken, the kind of woman you'd never suspect had spent 15 years asking permission to buy groceries. Her husband, a respected doctor, had given her an allowance of $50 a week for a family of 4. She'd learned to make miracles with cheap cuts of meat and day-old bread while he ate lunch at expensive restaurants. "I used to think I was lucky," she said quietly. "He never hit me, never yelled. I told myself it could be worse. And by the time I realized it was bad enough, I didn't know how to leave." Deborah's story was perhaps the most shocking. She discovered the second family by accident, a Facebook message from a woman claiming to be her husband's wife. Not his mistress, his wife. He'd married her in a different state, had 2 children with her, been living a complete double life for 7 years. "The thing that kills me," Deborah said, her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee, "is that I was happy. I thought we were happy. I'd smile at him across the dinner table and think, we're so lucky. And the whole time, he had another dinner table, another family, another life." These women became my friends, my support system, my proof that I wasn't alone. We celebrated each other's victories, no matter how small. Maria's first month with all bills paid on time. Jennifer's decision to go back to work as a substitute teacher. Deborah's successful appeal to have her name removed from joint debts. And we held each other through the hard days. The days when the loneliness felt crushing. The days when we doubted everything. The days when we were tempted to go back because anything seemed better than starting over. The group facilitator, a social worker named Brenda, taught us practical skills alongside emotional support. How to create a safety plan, how to protect our documents, how to recognize red flags in future relationships. But more than that, she taught us that we deserved better, deserved to be believed, respected, valued. You're not victims, she'd say at the end of each session. You're survivors. Never forget the difference. Each story was different, but the patterns were the same. The isolation, the control, the systematic erosion of self-worth. One of the women in the group, a retired teacher named Linda, said something that stuck with me. The hardest part isn't leaving, it's forgiving yourself for staying so long. She was right. For months, I beat myself up over the signs I'd missed, the questions I hadn't asked, the years I'd wasted believing his lies. But eventually, I realized that blame wasn't productive. It was just another way of staying trapped. Linda had left her husband after 40 years of marriage. 40 years. When she told her story, her voice was steady, matter of fact. She'd started over at 72 years old, moved into senior housing, got a part-time job at a bookstore. If I can do it at 72, she told me, you can do it at 52. So I let it go. Let go of the anger, the shame, the what-ifs. Not because James deserved my forgiveness, but because I deserved my freedom. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't about absolving him. It was about releasing myself from the prison of resentment. Some days I managed it. Other days I woke up angry all over again. But slowly, gradually, the good days outnumbered the bad. 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Nicole at a grocery store. I was in the produce section, trying to decide if I could afford the organic strawberries or should stick with conventional, when I looked up and there she was. She looked thinner, tired, her smile forced as she talked on her phone. She was wearing expensive clothes, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, but something about her seemed diminished. Our eyes met. I saw recognition flash across her face, then something else. Shame, fear, regret. She didn't say anything, just grabbed her cart and hurried away, still talking on her phone, but in a voice too low for me to hear. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt sad. Sad for her, for the life she thought she was getting, for the inevitable moment when she'd realize James wasn't the man she thought he was. Because patterns don't change. Men who lie to one woman will lie to another. Men who steal from one family will steal from another. I bought the organic strawberries. A small luxury, but one I'd earned. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over. But scars are proof you survived. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. The single most crucial question you can ask yourself in any relationship is this: could this be happening to me? It sounds simple, almost too simple, but it's vital. Financial abuse is insidious. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in slowly, disguised as love, protection, partnership. Your partner handles the finances because they're better at it. They don't want you to worry. They're taking care of you. But here's what I learned. Taking care of you shouldn't mean keeping you in the dark. If you're in a relationship, ask yourself these questions. Do you know where all the money goes? Can you access your bank accounts without asking permission? Are you allowed to make financial decisions, or do you need approval first? Do you feel afraid to ask questions about money? If the answer to any of those questions makes you uncomfortable, pay attention. Trust that discomfort. I read somewhere that 60 to 80% of domestic abuse cases involve some form of coercive control. That's exactly what my life had become, A prison without bars, where I was controlled through money, through information, through the constant message that I wasn't capable of managing my own life. Here's some practical advice I wish someone had given me. First, always maintain your own bank account, even a small one. Even if you share finances with your partner, have something that's just yours. Second, educate yourself about your family's financial situation. Know where the money is, where it's going, what debts exist. You don't have to be a financial expert, but you should be informed. Third, keep copies of important documents, bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, insurance policies. Keep them somewhere your partner can't access and dispose of them. Fourth, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let anyone convince you you're being paranoid or oversensitive. Fifth, build a support network. Friends, family, support groups. People who will believe you and help you when things get hard. And here's the most important thing. If you're in a situation like I was, if you're trapped or scared or unsure, please know this. You are not too old, too dependent, or too anything to start over. You are capable of more than you know. You deserve better than someone who lies to you, manipulates you, uses you. Leaving isn't easy. It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but staying in a situation that's slowly killing your spirit is harder. I also learned that isolation is one of the most powerful tools abusers use. If you look back at my marriage, you'll see how James slowly cut me off from everyone. My family lived far away and we rarely visited. My friends drifted because I stopped calling. My career disappeared because he wanted me at home. He didn't lock me in the house. He didn't forbid me from seeing people. He just made it difficult, inconvenient, not worth the fight. And over time, I became so isolated that he was my entire world. If you notice that happening in your relationship, if you're drifting away from the people who love you, ask yourself why. Is it natural life changes, or is it your partner's influence? One more thing. If you know someone who might be in this situation, please don't judge them. Don't ask why they don't just leave. Don't tell them what you would do if you were them. Instead, listen. Believe them. Let them know you're there whenever they're ready. Sometimes that's all a person needs, to know they're not alone. I've been free from James for over a year now, and my life looks nothing like it did before. I'm not rich. I'm not living in a mansion. I don't have the revenge story where the bad guy loses everything and begs for forgiveness. But I have something better. I have myself back. I wake up every morning in my small apartment and make choices. What to wear, what to eat, how to spend my day. They're small choices, ordinary choices, but they're mine. I've reconnected with my sister. We talk every week now. Long conversations that range from the mundane to the profound. She told me she'd been worried about me for years, but didn't know how to reach me. You just seemed so far away, she said. Like James had built a wall around you and I didn't know how to get through. The first time we talked after I left James, really talked, I cried for an hour straight. Just sat on my balcony with the phone pressed to my ear and cried while she listened. She didn't try to fix it or tell me it would be okay. She just listened. And when I finally stopped, she said, "I've been waiting years to hear from my sister again. Welcome back." She flew out to visit me 2 months after the divorce was finalized, helped me paint my apartment, took me shopping for clothes that actually fit my body instead of hiding it, taught me how to use dating apps, even though I wasn't ready to date. We stayed up late drinking cheap wine on my balcony, talking about our childhood, our parents, all the years we'd lost touch. "I tried to tell you once," she said on her last night there, "about James, how he seemed controlling. But you got so defensive and I backed off. I should have pushed harder." I wouldn't have listened, I told her honestly. I wasn't ready to hear it. I had to figure it out on my own. Still, I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you. You're fighting for me now. That's what matters. We've planned a trip together for next spring, just the two of us, to visit our childhood home in Wisconsin. I haven't been back in over a decade. James always had reasons we couldn't go, but now I can. Now I get to make my own choices about where to go and when. She was right. He had built a wall, and I'd helped him, brick by brick, every time I chose him over her, over my friends, over myself. But the wall is down now. I've also started rediscovering old hobbies I'd abandoned. In my 20s, before James, I used to paint. Nothing professional, just watercolors for fun. Flowers, landscapes, whatever caught my eye. I'd set up my easel in parks or by the lake and lose myself for hours. James had called it a waste of time. "You're not going to make money at it," he'd said dismissively. "Why bother?" So I'd stopped, put my paints in a box in the garage, and forgot about them. Last month, I walked into an art supply store on impulse. The smell hit me immediately, that particular combination of paper and paint and possibility that I remembered from years ago. I bought a small set of watercolors, some brushes, a pad of paper. Spent more than I should have, but it felt like an investment in myself. The first time I sat down to paint in my apartment, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the brush. I felt ridiculous. A 53-year-old woman playing with watercolors like a child. But I dipped the brush in water, mixed the paint, and made the first stroke. It was terrible. The colors bled into each other wrong. The shapes were clumsy. The whole thing looked like a kindergarten project. But I didn't care, because for those 2 hours, I wasn't thinking about James or Nicole or the life I'd lost. I was just present, in my body, in that moment, creating something that existed purely because I wanted it to. I've painted something every week since then. They're all still terrible, but they're getting marginally less terrible, and more importantly, they're mine. Nobody gets to tell me if they're good enough or worth the time. I paint because it makes me happy, and that's reason enough. I've also started volunteering at the local library, the same one where I used to work before I married James. The head librarian, Mrs. Patterson, remembered me after all these years. "Kathy Morrison," she'd said with a warm smile. "I wondered what happened to you. We missed you around here." Something about that simple statement made me tear up. Someone had missed me. Someone had noticed I was gone. I volunteer there 2 afternoons a week now, helping with the literacy program, teaching adults to read. There's something profound about watching someone decode their first sentence, seeing that moment when the symbols on the page transform into meaning. It reminds me of my own transformation, the way I had to relearn how to read my own life, to see the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. One of my students, a 60-year-old man named Carlos, who'd been too ashamed his whole life to admit he couldn't read, told me last week that I was changing his life. I almost laughed. Me? Changing someone's life? I could barely manage my own. But then I realized that was the point. We're all just figuring it out as we go. Nobody has all the answers. Nobody's life is as together as it looks from the outside. And sometimes, the broken people are the best teachers because they know what it's like to put yourself back together. I've made new friends too. Women from the support group, colleagues from the legal aid clinic, neighbors in my apartment building. People who see me, the real me, not just James's wife. Last month, I went on a date. A nice man named Robert I met at the grocery store of all places. We were both reaching for the same bag of coffee, laughed about it, started talking. He asked for my number, and after a week of nervousness, I said yes. That week was torture. I must have picked up my phone 100 times to text him and cancel. Made up excuses in my head. I'm not ready. I'm too broken. I don't know how to do this anymore. What if he's like James? What if I can't trust my judgment? But Dr. Chen had been working with me on this exact thing. Not every man is James, she'd said gently, and you know more now than you did then. You know the red flags. You know your worth. Trust yourself. So I went. put on a dress I'd bought with my own money, did my makeup, gave myself a pep talk in the mirror. You can do this, and if you can't, you can leave. You always have the right to leave. The date was nice. Dinner at a casual Italian place called Bella Nota, small and family-owned, with red checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. Robert was a high school English teacher, divorced for 3 years, with 2 grown kids he clearly adored based on how his whole face lit up when he talked about them. He asked me about my life, and I gave him the abbreviated version. Recently divorced, starting over. It's been challenging. I bet, he said, not pushing for details. Divorce is hard, even when it's the right choice. We talked about books, about Phoenix, about his students, and their ridiculous excuses for late homework. The conversation flowed easily, no awkward silences, no uncomfortable moments. He laughed at my jokes, listened when I talked, didn't interrupt or talk over me. When the check came, he reached for it but paused. Is it okay if I get this? I know some women prefer to split it, and that's fine too. Such a small thing, asking my preference, but it meant everything. You can get it, I said. Thank you. When he dropped me off at my apartment, he didn't expect to be invited in, didn't make any assumptions or innuendos, just walked me to the door, hands in his pockets, and smiled. I had a wonderful time, he said. I'd really like to see you again, if you're interested. I was surprised to find that I was interested. Terrified, but interested. I'd like that, I said. But I should tell you, I'm not looking for anything serious right now. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of my marriage, and I need to take things slow. Slow is good, he said. Slow is perfect, actually. I'm in no rush. I just enjoy your company. We've been on 4 dates since then. Coffee, a movie, a walk through the botanical gardens, dinner at a Thai restaurant where he let me order for both of us because I knew more about Thai food than he did. Each date has been easy, comfortable, respectful. He doesn't push, doesn't demand my time or attention, doesn't get upset when I need space. He's just there, steady and kind, letting things develop at their own pace. I don't know if it will go anywhere. I'm not sure I'm ready for a relationship, might not be for a long time. But it feels good to be seen as someone worth courting, worth treating with respect. It feels good to remember that I'm allowed to want things, allowed to say yes or no based on what I actually want, not what someone else expects. More than that, it feels good to know that I can trust myself again, that my judgment isn't broken, just bruised, that I can tell the difference between someone who respects me and someone who controls me. Robert texted me yesterday asking if I wanted to go to an art exhibit next weekend. A watercolor exhibition at the local gallery. He remembered I'd mentioned painting, remembered it was something I cared about. That might not seem like much, but it is. It means he listens. It means he pays attention. It means he sees me as a whole person, not just a potential conquest or a project to fix. I said yes to the exhibit. And I said yes because I wanted to. Not because I felt obligated or afraid or guilty. That's freedom. That's what I fought for. That's what Nicole's cruel phone call, James's betrayal, and all those months of legal battles and self-doubt ultimately gave me. The right to say yes or no based solely on what I want. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I know this was a long, messy story, but I wanted to tell it honestly. The good, the bad, the ugly parts I'm still ashamed of. I'd love to know where you're listening from, what city, what time.